sort of 20-25 minutes long presentation, because we hope that there will be time for some questions and answers. So the floor is yours and you are warmly welcome.
Thank you. Right, can you all hear me? Yes, excellent. Istvan, thank you very much indeed for inviting me for at least, I think, the third presentation to you in different capacities. The first time I spoke, or at least the first time I remember Istvan inviting me to speak, was in May of 2014, talking about the European Parliament elections. And in those days, only 5 years ago, life seemed to be still fairly straightforward. If you were a British academic, you expected the United Kingdom's place to be in the European Union. You expected our politicians to be talking about the UK being at the heart of Europe, even though we were never very good at being at the heart of Europe. And there was always a slightly barbed joke that nobody was sure whether if the UK was at the heart of Europe, that was the beating heart of Europe, ensuring the European Union thrived, or whether it was as an embolism causing the demise of the European Union. But in 2014, there was still a sense that Britain was going to be possibly a constructive player in Europe, and certainly we were going to be playing an active role in the European Parliament elections. But of course, the UK was already semi-detached. The Liberals were fully part of the ALDE family. The Labour Party was part of the Socialist, the Party of European Socialists, or Socialist and Democrat group in the European Parliament. But the Conservatives had always been a little bit semi-detached. They never joined the European People's Party, but their MEPs had sat with the group in the European Parliament for 20 years. But in order to get elected as the Conservative Party leader, David Cameron had made one solitary policy pledge. And that policy pledge was to leave the European People's Party group. And he made that commitment in 2005. And for some years he didn't deliver on it. But ahead of the 2009 European Parliament elections, he suddenly announced that in the next Parliament the Tories wouldn't sit with the EPP. Now, that might not have sounded a very big deal in British politics. I suspect the average voter had no idea that the British MEPs sat with the EPP, or that the Liberals sat with ALDE, or the Socialists sat with the Socialists and Democrats. It didn't get talked about. As in so many European countries, there was a tendency only to focus on the British dimension of the European Parliament elections, not a European dimension. But obviously, from a European perspective and a European institutional perspective, the British Conservatives pulling out of the EPP mattered. It mattered at an institutional level, and it mattered at a bilateral level. And for some time, Angela Merkel refused to speak to David Cameron unless it was going to be in the forum of the EPP, which of course he wasn't attending. So there was a bilateral problem between the UK and Germany. But also, one of the key people in the EPP was Klaus Welle, who had been Secretary-General of the EPP and went on to be the Secretary-General of the European Parliament. Now, this might all sound like past history. Why on earth am I talking about it now? But partly as a segue from talking about the European elections and talking about where the UK is, but also because that fateful decision from 2005 actually had implications for the UK's relations with the European Union at a general level, but also in an institutional perspective, which mattered for Cameron's attempts to renegotiate our membership and affects our attempts to leave the European Union. Because if you want to win friends and influence people, two of the people that you don't want to alienate are Angela Merkel and Klaus Welle. So David Cameron didn't necessarily have the best start. He then decided that the only person he needed to talk to in a European context was Angela Merkel. So going from saying, I'm walking away from the EPP, he decided the person who would resolve all his problems in Europe would be Angela Merkel. Because she listened. And whereas she might be mutti at home, for Cameron, she became almost like a friendly aunt, that she was willing to listen, and she always said that she would do as much as she could. But as my friends from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung said, and I apologise in the context of a Friedrich Naumann Stiftung event, but the Adenauer Stiftung people who obviously are linked to the CDU, well, what Cameron never understood was that Merkel always said that she would do as much as she could. But that didn't mean that she could do everything, because just as Cameron had coalition partners and his own backbenchers creating a problem, and domestic media, so did Merkel. So there were various issues going on as the UK moved through Cameron becoming party leader of the Conservatives and then becoming Prime Minister, and the fateful day in 2013 of offering a referendum. But in 2014, we still assumed rather complacently that if there had to be a referendum, the UK would vote to stay in the European Union. So 5 years ago, my talk would have been a general, fairly positive talk about European Parliament elections. We didn't at the time even predict the rise of populism, and certainly we didn't expect there to be fascists sitting in national parliaments. So 5 years has changed a lot. But the last time I spoke in the context of the Hungarian European Society was in November 2015, and at that point I had begun a series of lectures which I kept refining about Cameron's pledge to reform, renegotiate and have a referendum. And for about 6 months I could keep refining the same lecture. And nothing changed very dramatically. We would see the campaign evolving. We could see that Cameron didn't seem to know what he was asking for. We could see the frustration of the 27 saying, "What on earth do you want?" But eventually, by the time I was speaking in Budapest in late November 2015, David Cameron had written to Donald Tusk and said, "This is what I want." And then, of course, in the context of the referendum, everything changed. In some ways, and nothing changed. The UK had the vote to leave the European Union, a change of Prime Minister, and Theresa May started going off trying to negotiate with people. And consistently, in the nearly 3 years since Theresa May became Prime Minister, what we hear again and again and again is, please tell us what you want, we don't know what you want. And this has caused huge annoyance in the United Kingdom. So I was talking to officials in Brussels in December, and I kept hearing, we don't know what you want. So I raised that as a question in the House of Lords, and the government minister got very cross. And I talked to him in a corridor afterwards, and he said, no, it's just not true. You know, they know what we want. We keep going to Brussels, and we keep telling them what we want. And here, I think, is one of the biggest problems for the UK's relationship with the European Union. So if we're thinking of consequences, I'm going to discuss the UK's ongoing relations with the European Union, the consequences for the UK and the consequences for the EU. So for the first point, I think we have created a difficult situation for ourselves in the United Kingdom, in that consistently the Prime Minister, whether it was Cameron or then May, has been fairly vague about what we've wanted. And that is reflective of the reason that we had a referendum in the first place. The referendum wasn't intended to deal with domestic problems. It wasn't intended to deal with the concerns of the general public. It was intended to deal with a domestic controversy within the Conservative Party. David Cameron recognised his party was deeply divided. He recognised that the party was being challenged from the right by the UK Independence Party, pushing an anti-immigration and a Eurosceptic populist narrative, exactly the sort of thing that we were hearing about this morning in Central and Eastern Europe. But that's very much what was being put forward in 2009 in the European Parliament elections in the UK and in 2014. So Cameron was hoping, by pledging to have a referendum, he would be able to outflank the UK Independence Party, because they don't have any members of Parliament. They might have members of the European Parliament, but it takes members of the national Parliament to be able to bring about a referendum. So Cameron knew that if he had a referendum, he was offering something that UKIP wouldn't be able to deliver. And he was also trying to placate his own backbenchers. What he hadn't realised when he called the referendum, or pledged the referendum and eventually had to call it, was that actually there was huge dissatisfaction in the United Kingdom. There were huge swathes of the country who felt they'd been let down by mainstream politicians of left and right. People who felt that nobody was listening. And on that, the UK Independence Party had begun to outstrip Labour and the Conservatives. And the Leave campaign managed to create a narrative that resonated. Vote Leave, take back control of our borders, our laws and our taxes. And for some people, they wanted control of their laws, they wanted this sovereignty narrative. For others, they wanted the anti-immigrant narrative that characterises populist nationalist parties. And for some, there was just a sense that they wanted somebody, anybody, to be listening to them. And that has shaped British politics since 2016. There is now an understanding in British politics that many people feel they've been left behind by globalisation and by European integration and by mainstream politicians. So very much the sort of narrative that Jean-Marie Le Pen and then Marine Le Pen put forward in France came to the fore in the United Kingdom. But the problem is the mainstream parties haven't yet found a way to deal with those issues. There is still a sense of the Labour Party trying to respond to the left behind and saying, well, we'll have a soft Brexit. We have a Conservative Party that remains even more divided in 2019 than it was in 2016, and a Liberal Democrat Party that says we don't want to leave at all. But the result of that is that Theresa May is trying to find a narrative that works at home and in Europe of where she's trying to get to. And the result is utter confusion and vagueness, because you cannot reconcile a position of the European Research Group, which despite the name doesn't seem to do any research on Europe, but is a deeply Eurosceptic wing, almost a party within a party of the Conservative Party, with those people that want to remain, or who certainly want to be part of a customs union and the single market. It's not possible to reconcile all of those things, but Theresa May has been trying to do that. The result in the withdrawal agreement is something that is seen by all sides in the UK as being vague. It doesn't deliver clarity in terms of leaving the European Union. It would leave us very much in the same position as Norway, of being linked to the European project, linked to European policies, but with no ability to influence policies. And so the internal debate is ongoing. The withdrawal agreement, meanwhile, sits on the table. And the 27 have said, well, this is the agreement, you can take it or leave it, but we're still not really sure what you want. And the answer is, neither are we, because it's not possible to reconcile a hard leave position and an attempt to have a so-called soft Brexit. So the relationship between the UK and the 27 remains confused and muddled. The withdrawal agreement is only supposed to deal with the divorce. It isn't supposed to deal with what our future relationship will look like. That is meant to come next. But because the British government accepted the position that Barnier put forward of insisting the withdrawal agreement be decided before the future relationship be negotiated, we've had an impasse for the last several months. It doesn't look as if that's going to change, but there is one new issue on the table, and that is the fact that at its meeting, the last two European Council meetings, we've been given a series of different deadlines. And one of the deadlines is basically, you either leave the European Union by the 1st of June, or you hold European Parliament elections. And I think there is a bit of hope in the Conservative Party that maybe in the next few weeks, the Conservatives, even those who don't like the withdrawal agreement, might suddenly decide they want to ratify it, because if they don't, we have to have European Parliament elections in the United Kingdom. And the thing that upsets the Conservatives most of all is the idea that they have to have European Parliament elections. 3 years after a referendum to leave the European Union, why on earth would we have European Parliament elections? They keep asking. And I have to say, as somebody that wrote my doctorate on elections to the European Parliament, much as I want to be part of European elections and to vote on the 23rd of May, there is something a little bit peculiar about a country that's trying to leave the European Union, going through European Parliament elections to elect MEPs who will only be there now potentially till October, but who might have a say on who the next European Commission President is going to be. And so we're in a very odd position that the 27 say they don't know what the UK wants, which is a perfectly reasonable view to have because we don't know what we want either. But they have negotiated us to a position where the only way Theresa May can keep us in the European Union and try and get the deal through is to agree to have European Parliament elections, which many Conservatives are saying they will boycott. So that leaves us in a very odd position. Confusion on all sides as to what the UK wants, the danger that the UK is going to have European Parliament elections and that those elections will be hijacked by the extreme leavers and what some people consider the extreme remainers. Because Brexit has broken British politics. It has cut directly through the Conservative Party, but also through the Labour Party. And rather than European Parliament elections, if we have them in the United Kingdom, simply being Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrat, Green and UKIP, we have two new political parties who are proposing to stand in the European elections. One is called the Brexit Party. Now, unfortunately, it's not quite as newfangled as it might sound, because it has a leader who is what we might call in British politics, British parlance, a retread. Somebody who's been in politics and come back. And that is Nigel Farage. Because Nigel Farage has decided the UK Independence Party is no longer for him. It is too right-wing. It is too Islamophobic. It is racist. So the former leader of UKIP has accepted that the UK Independence Party isn't fit for purpose. However, he says if we're going to have European Parliament elections, then he is jolly well going to be there fighting to get back into the European Parliament. Someone who claims that the people are against us, claims that he isn't a career politician, who has been in the European Parliament since 1999, wants to have yet another European mandate. Well, I'm pretty sure for the 27, having Nigel Farage back in the European Parliament isn't something that many people are greatly enthusiastic about. But whereas UKIP was always seen as a fringe organisation, as a marginal organisation, it was treated with contempt by mainstream politicians. It's worth bearing in mind that UKIP got the UK to the point of having a referendum in the first place. And while UKIP didn't front the Leave campaign, many of its messages were used by Vote Leave. And the new Brexit Party has already got some quite nice branding. It's got a sort of subtle, pale Cambridge blue colouring. So Cambridge blue, for anybody that doesn't know it, is a sort of watery blue colour. And it has, as one of its candidates, somebody called Annunziata Rees-Mogg. She was a Tory party candidate. She wasn't successful. She's now left the Conservative Party and is standing to be a Brexit candidate. Her brother is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who appears still to live in the 18th century. He's a member of Parliament. He speaks always terribly politely, gives the impression of being very urbane. But he leads the European Research Group. He is passionately anti-European, and he has as his number two somebody called Marc Francois, who is the Rottweiler of the ERG, who spends his time denigrating pro-Europeans, denigrating the European Union. And what we see is a wing of the Conservative Party, who, if they don't fight the European elections, will probably be supporting the Brexit Party. So we've seen a breakdown of the right in British politics, but we've also seen something of a breakdown of the left. Several members of the Labour Party have left, and with a handful of Tories have created what they're calling Change UK. But they've been known as the independent group, TIG, or Tiggers. So anybody that knows the Disney stories of Winnie the Pooh, there is a character called Tigger, a tiger, who bounces up and down. And these Tiggers, these new people, have a passion to remain in the European Union. They want a referendum. They're saying almost the same things that the Liberal Democrats have been saying for the last 3 years since the referendum. But unlike the Liberal Democrats, the Tiggers are saying, we're new, we're different, we're a different voice. We are the party to give a referendum, they say. Another referendum on staying in the European Union. So what we're likely to see is a set of elections, if they happen, that are fought between Brexiteers and passionate Remainers, with the mainstream parties somewhat damaged. But the likelihood is that the Labour Party will get the most seats, presumably followed by the Brexit Party. And I'm saying this very much off the top of my head, because whereas you've heard polling data for the other 27 countries this morning, until the last few days, the assumption was the UK wouldn't have European Parliament elections this year. But if we do, then the mainstream right, I think, are not going to do well, may not stand. The Brexiteers will, but the Tiggers might do well as well. The problem is that the Tiggers, the Liberal Democrats and the Greens are likely to split the Remain vote. So we're likely to see fragmentation, but it is possible that the Labour Party will send enough members to the Socialist delegation to have a significant impact in the elections for the head of the European Commission. So it is possible that despite Brexit, the UK will have an ongoing effect on the European institutions, at least until October, assuming we do leave. But Brexit has, I think, broken British politics. How it comes back together is very difficult to analyse. That's in terms of party politics. It is potentially going to break the United Kingdom as well, however, because if the UK does leave, the chances are that the Scottish Nationalist Party will press for another referendum on Scottish independence. And for years, the expectation was that Spain would block an independent Scotland joining the European Union as a new independent country because of the parallels with Catalonia. But if the UK is leaving and Scotland doesn't want to leave, I think the chances are that we are now going to see the possibility of an independent Scotland in Europe. What we may also see is moves towards a united Ireland, something that the Conservative Party and the Democratic Unionist Party have both long pledged should never happen. The Conservative Party is officially the Conservative and Unionist Party, where Unionist means keeping the United Kingdom together of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And yet, if we don't resolve the issues over Brexit, there will be momentum in the island of Ireland for a reunification of Ireland. The only slight flaw in that argument is that the Republic isn't very keen any longer on having a united Ireland. So whether we get that or not is still an open question, and it's not entirely up to the voters of Northern Ireland to decide. But we are potentially going to have a disunited kingdom with a rump England and Wales outside the European Union, which is at least a possibility. So the consequences for the United Kingdom could be profound. And for the European Union may be profound, but they may not be. At the time of the referendum, the Brexiteers were very excited about the idea that they were the avant-garde, that they were going to take the UK out of the European Union, and this would be just the precursor for the Frexit, for the Front National to take France out of the European Union, where maybe there might be Italcit, that the Italians would want to leave, and obviously Ireland would naturally follow the UK out of the European Union. That's what they suggested then. In the 3 years since the referendum, what we've seen is that the European Union seems to be far more united than the United Kingdom. The 27 have spoken with one voice, while the United Kingdom has spoken with myriad voices. But I think we are going to be at a turning point. If the UK does finally leave the European Union sometime during 2019, we're going to have, I think, a turning point where either the results of Brexit are a consolidation and a deepening of European integration, where the 27 move forward perhaps in the way Macron would like, saying we're now, and the way that Juncker would clearly like, we have a single currency, we're a single entity, we're no longer being blocked by the United Kingdom, we can move ahead. Or we see fragmentation in the European Union when it becomes clear that the problems of integration over the last 45 years haven't solely been caused by the United Kingdom, that the United Kingdom in many ways has been the fall guy for other countries also not wanting further integration in some areas. Because the idea of a common European army or increased cooperation on foreign policy might sound interesting in theory, but who's going to pay for it? Is it really just going to be a French army? Or is Germany going to double its defence expenditure? A little unlikely. Closer cooperation on the euro. Necessary if we want a stable currency. But how far is Luxembourg, for example, actually going to be willing to have fiscal harmonisation? Schengen, strengthened borders, are the Visegrad countries going to want that? So I think what we're going to find is, whereas the United Kingdom might look like the most awkward partner, the reality is going to be that in a Europe of 27, some of the differences will come to the fore once the UK leaves, and in particular, once the UK stops contributing to the budget, at which point some of the tensions that have been below the surface may come back to the fore, as somebody has to pick up the tab. Before 1989, it was always Germany that was willing to pick up the tab. In the intervening 30 years, that's become less likely. And I think once Angela Merkel ceases to be Chancellor of Germany, the idea that Germany is actually going to be willing to foot the bill will become increasingly unlikely. So I think the political consequences of Brexit could be profound. If I'm being negative, then I think they will highlight the challenges for the European Union. I didn't get the memo either about being optimistic, but if I'm meant to be optimistic as a final point, then I could suggest that maybe that alternative scenario of Britain leaving and the 27 saying we're actually better together could come to the fore. But a lot of that is going to depend on what happens in all of the elections of 2019, and I think it's too soon to speculate on that. All I would say is that if you're an academic, a politician, a lawyer or a journalist, Brexit has given an awful lot of opportunity for new books, new speeches and conferences such as this one. So I will stop there and throw it open to questions.
Thank you. This is a great sort of sweep of the land. But I'm going to ask a very difficult question, which is sort of asking you to look into the crystal ball and tell us what you think the final outcome is likely to be. Not the final outcome, but what you think the future relationship is actually going to be like. Because at the moment we're so busy negotiating the terms of the divorce that the really important questions are completely way out there. So as somebody who's very well informed, I wonder where your money is in terms of the future relationship. And the question is somewhat different, but again, somebody Julie is very well informed about the Lib Dem, the Liberal Democrats in the UK, and I was wondering what her views are on the party's chances in not just in the European elections, but in domestic politics, because of course the only consistently pro-European party, it's not really been doing it any favors in recent times. So I guess the party is still paying the price for being a junior coalition partner. So I just wonder if you could speculate about the future of the party itself and whether being pro-European is likely to be a kind of a ticket to greater electoral fortunes?
Well, Brexit obviously is becoming a farce already, and then we are all following it with a lot of disgust and even certain smileys. And by the way, 30 years ago, if somebody would have told me that, in 2019, UK will be leaving European Union under chairmanship in the European Union of Romania, I would say, well, that's kind of a bad joke, but it's happening.
No, because we might not go till October.
Oh, okay. So no, Romania will be not responsible. Okay, but now seriously.
Only seeking for the lawyer.
Now seriously, because I'm glad you mentioned Scotland. What London can do actually to prevent that Scotland would leave, even under circumstances that Brexit will end up, in a very unfortunate way for all of us. So what can be done? Simple question.
Shusha, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was really extraordinary overview on this highly complicated thing, which it's really difficult to follow. But my question first, you said that in the future Europe, Germany would need to take a leadership role in terms of keeping the union together because of obvious interest for Germany. And you said that it's less likely to happen in the future. So I wonder, why do you think German society or the political elite or the new political leadership is there? And if Germany still would, who would be their strongest allies?
The disadvantage of doing politics and teaching politics is that for the last 3 years, if I have to admit to people what I do, then I get one of two scenarios. One is, well, what I think is, and I have to listen to a rehearsal of why people voted leave or remain, and I have to try quite politely and not say, you know what, I'm not actually interested anymore in why you voted the way you did in 2016. We just now need to try and move on. But I can't really say that. But the other question is, what's going to happen? To which the honest answer is, I've absolutely no idea. And if anyone says they know, they're lying. So Aggie's question is particularly difficult because to some extent it is unknowable. But at the same time, although we are officially fighting over the terms of the divorce, it is partly because politicians are saying, well, we're not really interested in the divorce. We want to know what's going to happen to the children. We want to know who's going to get the house and so on. And actually, for some of us, we still want full access to the house and the children, but we don't want to pay any alimony. We don't, so there are a whole set of things going on. But I think we are likely to find in the next few weeks where the UK is going in terms of probably a customs arrangement. Maybe membership of the EEA, but I think more likely a customs arrangement and not the EEA. If I had to put money on something today, that's where I think we would end up. But it all depends on whether the Labour Party is really going to stick to its party policy, which is to have a referendum on the deal. So they are supposed to be having support a referendum. The problem is that Jeremy Corbyn, as party leader, doesn't really believe in it. So everything's up for grabs, which then also helps explain the difficulty of the Liberal Democrats and success, because in the 2017 general election, the Labour Party did a fantastic job of obfuscation. So people knew that the Conservative Party said, we will deliver on Brexit. That's all they knew, really. Brexit means Brexit, and we will deliver it. The Labour Party in the pro-European metropolitan centres of London, Cambridge, Oxford made people think that they were in favour of a much softer Brexit than Conservatives, and in Leave voting parts of the country, they said, we feel your pain, we understand about austerity, we're listening to you, just as the populist Vote Leave campaign had done. But we believe in the referendum and we will deliver Brexit. So they managed in 2017 to win over the Leavers and the Remainers, and the Liberal Democrat position was ignored. So what's not clear in the next few weeks is whether the Tiggers, this new group, is going to manage to get more airtime than the Lib Dems as a new, fresh set of people saying, we believe in another referendum and basically kill off the Liberal Democrats, or whether the Lib Dem campaign machine on the ground is going to do a much better job, because after all, we've got councillors, we've got a whole party machine that the new people don't have. So there is still scope. Also, the Liberal Democrats are having a leadership election in May. So if we get a bright new leader who's actually going to be a more dynamic presence in the media, that might help. What can London do to prevent Scotland leaving? To some extent, Brexit, a bit like I said, the EU could go in one of two directions in response to Brexit. So could Scottish independence. Nicola Sturgeon, as leader of the SNP, won't call a referendum unless she thinks she can win it. And there are some people in Scotland who voted to stay as part of the United Kingdom in 2014 because they believed that was going to be the best way of staying in the European Union. That no longer looks the case. So for those people, they might now say they'd rather have an independent Scotland. But from a financial perspective, Brexit Britain is going to be damaged financially, and that will include Scotland, whether it's part of the United Kingdom or not. But Scotland has its largest market is England, and so to pull away from that at a time of change may potentially mean that risk-averse Scots won't actually call to leave. So I think the economics might outweigh the politics on that one. And leadership, what I was really meaning in terms of Germany once the UK leaves was actually on the financial side, who is going to pick up the tab? And I don't think that we're going to see that in the same way. I mean, the person who I think wants to lead Europe in the context of Brexit is the new General de Gaulle. Macron seems to think that here is a fantastic opportunity of France playing a major role in Europe, ideally, I think, as part of a Franco-German couple. The peculiarity is that Marc Francois, Deputy Chair of the European Research Group, has now started banging on about the idea that if we're not allowed to leave the European Union straight away, then we're just going to be a Trojan horse, he's saying, which is exactly, of course, what General de Gaulle was so worried about in the 1960s when he stopped the United Kingdom joining in the first place. And the only other thing that I would say, you said about it being a farce. There is an Agatha Christie play on in London that's been going on, I think, since the 1950s, called The Mousetrap. And this is beginning to feel a little bit like The Mousetrap. And the key thing about the play is if you go and see it, you're asked, if you come and see this play, please don't tell people the ending. Because obviously if they know the ending, they won't come and see it. And that play has been going on for 60 years. Maybe that's what Theresa May is hoping for. If we don't tell people what we want, nobody will ever know the ending.
Very nice. Actually, I've seen that theatre, and I remember that even the artists who played the role, there were fake names on it because they played with that.
Never been so much discussed the divorce about since the time of Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. This makes me recall the famous film called Mr. and Mrs. Smith back in 2005. It's a film about romance and love, ardent romance and love, so they were trying to kill each other in the most awkward style possible, and everything ended in rose colors. Malid, I just wanted to ask you, how would you see UK's role in NATO after Brexit? Because in the end, what would be around the table, that would be the same former partners UK had as a member of the European Union. So how would you see it? It's quite a psychoanalytic question, I can imagine, but I'm eager to hear your answer. Thank you.
I have two questions sort of linked with each other. One is about UKIP or the Brexit Party. What exactly, or how much can we know now at this point of time? On what ticket is this party going to campaign for the European elections, if there will be one? I mean, are they going to say that we are going to Strasbourg because we want to destroy Europe? Or what exactly? So how, because it's difficult to imagine that people are going to vote for a party which comes with the slogan that we want to destroy Europe. So what is it that what is their campaign slogan going to be? The second is that couldn't we look at the European, even considering that the Brexit party is going to do quite well, couldn't we look at, and doesn't maybe Theresa May look at the European Parliament elections, possible European Parliament elections, like a proxy for a second vote, for a people's vote. So in case, let's say as you described or predicted that the pro-European parties might do quite well, maybe all together better than the Brexit party or the Conservatives, including the Labour, then couldn't somebody say then afterwards, well, look, the wind has changed in the UK, and look, people are voting for Remainer parties. And so that you're not going to need another referendum, because of course you can say that you cannot, like they always repeat, that you cannot make a nation vote as many times as you want until they say the right answer. So, but this is a way of sort of turning public opinion and showing that the Brexiters and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who, in my opinion, is a Nazi in striped suit, that the UK people were misled, and they don't really want to stay out because it's just stupid. It's simply stupid. So, and then, just as you said, you don't deliver, and you never deliver, and the time solves the crisis. Is this a possible scenario?
Yeah, of course, Brexit is an existential moment for Britain, and you spend most of your time discussing it. But I would be curious for those people in Britain who are annoyed discussing Brexit. What are their concerns? What are other issues that they believe that should be tackled by politicians who are so much focused on Brexit?
Okay, and the last question is about Ireland and Northern Ireland. I think that it's somehow Brexit turned to be a very special case, because as far as I understand, the number one concern of the Brexiteers is about Northern Ireland and the so-called backstop. So if we did not have this very special situation, maybe Britain would be out by now. So my question is whether, is there any analogy concerning a Frexit or Hungarian exit? Because we don't have this problem between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And if you are able to explain us what actually backstop means, because I think we don't really understand. And please be short on the other hand, because we have to continue. Thank you.
That's just cruel.
Yeah.
One of the things before the referendum that I remember droning on about in the House of Lords was how people say when they're getting divorced, it's going to be amicable. You know, we still get on well, we're going to be friends, we're going to, work together over the children, and then it goes wrong. And the point I made was the only people that benefit are lawyers. And I was wrong, because clearly, as I've now said, academics and others also in some ways benefit from Brexit, at least as having a new object of study. But the leavers have a tendency to say that nothing will change other than what they want to change, so that by leaving the European Union, we don't alter any relationship. And they don't seem to understand that, just as I was saying earlier about Cameron causing damage to the relationship with Merkel and Klaus Welle when he pulled the Conservatives out of the EPP, so by leaving the European Union, the UK is losing a set of close relationships. And although we will still be in the UN Security Council and NATO and OSCE and another set, all sorts of organisations, the relationships will change. And if you say that to the Leavers, they just shake their heads and say, don't be stupid, you're just scaremongering. One of the key things is going to be that for 45 years, we've built up relationships that are through the European Parliament, through European-level political parties, through the European institutions, where officials and politicians meet on a regular basis. They get to know each other, they get to know how each other thinks, and therefore by the time you're meeting in a NATO context, you've built up some of those relations. So I think we're going to be more distant, even though we will still formally be in the room. One of the key issues is going to be whether we can actually have the sort of UK-EU security treaty that the Prime Minister wants, because the one area where she's actually being positive and constructive is wanting a really solid security treaty. The problem is that the noises we're getting back from the 27 aren't quite that constructive. The European elections as a proxy for another referendum, I think that's how the Liberal Democrats and the Tiggers see it. So from a strong pro-Remain side, yes, this is going to be an opportunity to say people want to stay in the European Union. And the Brexit Party, their mantra is going to be, we have been betrayed. We, the people, have been betrayed by an establishment stitch-up, and it's going to be absolutely a rerun of 2016, because they're going to say, you were promised Brexit, and look what the Prime Minister's doing. So I think there is every opportunity for the Brexit Party, not to say they want to destroy the European Union, but to say, this is our opportunity, this is your chance to say, you voted for Brexit, this is what you wanted, reinforce it. So again, that makes it a bit of a proxy for another referendum. Will Theresa May see it like that? Very unlikely, because she doesn't deviate, she doesn't have any imagination, and these are just elections that she doesn't want to have. And if she can get out of them, she will. What other issues? Almost everything. Dealing with the impact of austerity, dealing with cuts, dealing with education and the health service. All the things that people were frustrated about when they were persuaded to vote leave in 2016, which haven't been tackled at all, because all the bandwidth is about Brexit. So I think if we could take this off the table, then we'd go back to something that was slightly more like normal politics again. Sorry, what was your...
NATO, that was NATO?
No, I think I hope I intended to answer the NATO question, yes. Yes.
So the very last one was about Ireland and Northern Ireland and backstop.
Oh. The Prime Minister has given 3 red lines that says we want to be outside the customs union and the single market, but we don't want any divisions in the Irish Sea or... and there mustn't be a hard border between the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland. And the problem with that is you can't have... So if we're going to stick with the Belfast Agreement of 20 years ago, then we can't have a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and the south of Ireland. And so the backstop is intended to ensure that doesn't happen. The alternative that Barnier offered us was we could have the whole of Ireland in a customs union. But that would then create a division in the Irish Sea, and the DUP, which is giving confidence and supply, although it was supposed to be, it no longer is, to the Conservatives, have said under no circumstances is that acceptable. And that is in part because it will further jeopardise the United Kingdom as an entity, because it's likely to precipitate Irish reunification and Scottish independence, because if Northern Ireland's got a different relationship with the EU, Scotland will want that as well.